My son lay dying, hooked to machines, fighting for every breath, and his own wife, my daughter-in-law, abandoned him. She left a deceitful note, vanishing without a trace, while I, his mother, was kept in the dark for days. I stood by his bedside, a silent promise forming in my heart. You won't believe what happened next. This is my story. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. Evelyn's flight touched down 2 days earlier than planned, a delightful secret she had been nurturing all the way home. The quarterly conference had wrapped up ahead of schedule, leaving her with a spontaneous window to surprise David, Charlotte, and her grandson, Leo. She pictured David's surprised grin, Charlotte's warm hug, and Leo's excited chatter. The thought of it brought a lightness to her step as she navigated the familiar streets towards their house. The long hours of presentations and networking faded from her mind, replaced by the anticipation of a joyous reunion. She couldn't wait to see the smiles on their faces, to simply be home, enveloped in the comforting chaos of family life. Pulling into the driveway, Evelyn noticed a subtle stillness that immediately pricked at her sense of normalcy. The usually vibrant garden seemed to hold its breath, and the curtains in the living room were drawn, unusual for mid-afternoon. As she unlocked the front door, the silence that greeted her was not the peaceful quiet of an empty house, but something more profound, almost chilling. The air inside felt cold, stale, devoid of the familiar warmth and faint aroma of Charlotte's baking or Leo's toys scattered about. An unsettling quiet permeated every corner, immediately setting Evelyn's nerves on edge. Her carefully constructed image of a happy surprise began to unravel. Stepping further inside, her eyes fell upon David's favorite ceramic coffee mug on the kitchen counter, half empty, a thin film of dust already settling on its rim. Beside the front door, his work shoes, usually neatly aligned, were carelessly kicked off, one facing inward, the other outward. David was a creature of habit, meticulous to a fault, especially about his morning routine. This small detail, so out of character, sent a ripple of unease through Evelyn. It spoke of haste, of an abrupt departure that felt distinctly wrong. The cold mug and the misplaced shoes were like silent alarms ringing in her mind. David? Charlotte? Leo? Evelyn's voice echoed in the cavernous silence, each syllable swallowed by the empty rooms. She walked through the house, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floors, a sound usually masked by the hum of daily life. The living room was neat, too neat. The cushions plumped. No toys in sight. Leo's room, usually a riot of color and childhood imagination, was pristine. The bed made, his favorite stuffed animal placed precisely on the pillow. A cold knot tightened in Evelyn's stomach. This wasn't just quiet, it was abandoned. No sign of life, no trace of the vibrant family she had expected to embrace. The silence intensified her growing panic, making her heart pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Then, on the refrigerator, a small, square piece of paper, held by a magnetic pineapple, Charlotte's handwriting, usually elegant and flowing, was a hasty scrawl. Evelyn pulled it down, her eyes darting across the words. David at Street. Mary's hospital. Emergency. Had to leave town for family crisis. Will call soon. The world seemed to tilt. David in the hospital? An emergency? And Charlotte had to leave town for a family crisis? The note offered no details, no phone numbers, just a chilling ambiguity. Her mind raced, grappling with the conflicting information. Why wouldn't Charlotte call her? Why such a vague, terse message if David was in a serious condition? And where was Leo? The note made no mention of her grandson. Had Charlotte taken him with her? The questions swirled, each more terrifying than the last. Without another thought, Evelyn snatched her car keys, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The drive to Street Mary's hospital was a blur of traffic lights and anxious glances at her phone. She tried David's number first, then Charlotte's, each call going straight to voicemail. The automated messages, cool and indifferent, only fueled her desperation. Her imagination conjured horrific images. David, pale and unresponsive, perhaps unconscious. The lack of information, the inability to reach anyone, amplified her fear to an unbearable pitch. Each red light felt like an eternity, each green light a momentary reprieve before the next wave of anxiety washed over her. The hospital entrance was a chaotic symphony of hurried footsteps and hushed voices. Evelyn approached the information desk, her voice trembling as she asked for David. The receptionist typed for a moment, then directed her to the ICU waiting area, advising her to speak with Nurse Brenda. A wave of nausea washed over Evelyn. ICU. It sounded so grave. Nurse Brenda, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, met her gaze with a soft, knowing expression that instantly confirmed Evelyn's worst fears. "Mrs. Miller?" she began, her voice low. "David was admitted 4 days ago. Severe pneumonia complicated by sepsis. He's been unconscious for the past 2 days." Evelyn's breath hitched. 4 days. Unconscious for 2. The world swam before her eyes. A cold, hard anger ignited within Evelyn, mingling with her profound grief. 4 days. David had been fighting for his life, alone, while Charlotte was supposedly dealing with an unreachable family crisis. The note on the fridge, so casual, so dismissive in its brevity, now felt like a cruel deception. How could a wife abandon her husband in such a critical state? How could she not have informed David's own mother? The betrayal was a bitter taste in her mouth. And Leo? Where was Leo during all of this? The reality of Charlotte's actions, or rather, her inaction, was a staggering blow. Nurse Brenda's next words twisted the knife even deeper. "Charlotte left yesterday morning," she explained gently, her gaze filled with sympathy. "Said she had a family emergency out of town. We haven't heard from her since." Evelyn stared, speechless. Charlotte hadn't just left David. She had abandoned him at the hospital, disappearing without a trace, leaving David vulnerable, and Evelyn completely unaware. It wasn't just neglect. It was an act of shocking callousness. The anger, sharp and potent, began to harden into something colder, more resolute. With a heavy heart, Evelyn was led to David's room in the intensive care unit. The sterile air, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the faint hiss of oxygen, it all assaulted her senses. And then she saw him, her strong, vibrant son, now a pale, frail shadow, almost lost amidst a tangle of tubes, wires, and monitoring equipment. His chest rose and fell with the mechanical assistance of a ventilator, his face stark against the white pillow. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, hot and stinging. She reached for his hand, so cool and unresponsive beneath her touch. Leaning closer, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Mom's here now, my love. I'm here." It was a promise, not just to her son, but to herself. She wouldn't leave him. And she would find out exactly what had happened. Dr. Rossi, a man with weary but kind eyes, approached Evelyn in the sterile quiet of the ICU waiting area. He spoke with a quiet gravity, emphasizing the critical nature of David's condition. "The next 48 hours are crucial for his stabilization, Mrs. Miller," he explained, his voice low and steady. "We're doing everything we can, but pneumonia this severe, coupled with sepsis, is a formidable enemy. His body is fighting hard, but he's still very fragile." Evelyn nodded, her throat tight, absorbing every word, every nuance of his expression. The reality of David's fight for life settled heavy in her chest. Then, Dr. Rossi offered a piece of information that twisted the knot of confusion in Evelyn's gut even tighter. "Mrs. Miller, David was actually brought in 5 days ago by his wife, Charlotte. He presented with severe respiratory distress, but after initial treatment, he seemed to improve slightly. They chose to go home, against our stronger recommendation for observation." He paused, his gaze softening with sympathy. "He collapsed at home later that night and was rushed back in a much more critical state. That's when we discovered the sepsis." The revelation hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Charlotte had known. She had been there at the beginning, had made a decision that led to David's relapse, and yet had said nothing. Dr. Rossi continued, filling in the gaps of the agonizing 4 days Evelyn had been unaware. Charlotte was here for the first 2 days after his readmission. She seemed quite distressed, very concerned for David. Then, she informed our nurses she had to leave suddenly for a family emergency out of town. She assured us she'd be back as soon as she could. Evelyn's mind reeled. Distressed? Concerned? It hardly aligned with the vague, almost dismissive note left on the fridge. The doctor's words painted a picture of a wife who had been present, only to vanish, leaving David alone in his most vulnerable state. Why hadn't she called? Why hadn't she reached out to David's own mother, knowing the gravity of his condition? The questions gnawed at Evelyn, relentlessly. Evelyn refused to leave David's side. She pulled a chair close to his bed, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, the flickering numbers on the monitors. She held his hand, cool and still, whispering words of encouragement, prayers for his recovery. Sleep was an impossibility. Her mind was a whirlwind of anxieties about David, of unanswered questions about Charlotte's sudden departure. What kind of family emergency could be so urgent, so all-consuming, that it eclipsed her husband's life-threatening illness? And where was Leo? The unaddressed question of her grandson's whereabouts added another layer of torment to her already fractured thoughts. Every passing minute seemed to deepen the mystery, solidifying a growing suspicion that something was terribly wrong. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, the hospital corridors eerily quiet, Evelyn's exhausted mind couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. She needed answers. Desperate for a clue, any crumb of information, she pulled out her phone and accessed Charlotte's Instagram profile. Perhaps a post, a story, anything, might shed light on a genuine family crisis. A sudden, unforeseen tragedy that could possibly explain her abandonment of David. Evelyn knew Charlotte was a frequent user of social media, often sharing snippets of their life. With trembling fingers, she scrolled, her heart hammering with a mixture of dread and a desperate, fragile hope. Her breath hitched. Her heart seemed to stop altogether. There, at the top of Charlotte's feed, a brand new post, uploaded just 12 hours prior. It was Charlotte, but not the Charlotte Evelyn knew, not the distressed wife Dr. Rossi had described. This Charlotte was radiant, bathed in brilliant sunshine, posing on the deck of what was unmistakably a luxury cruise ship. She was wearing a vibrant turquoise bikini, her smile wide and carefree, a tropical drink in her hand. The ocean stretched endlessly behind her, a pristine blue. The caption beneath the photo seared itself into Evelyn's brain. "It's so good to be free." The words resonated with a chilling finality. Free. Free from what? Free from her dying husband? A cold wave of disbelief, quickly followed by a searing anger, washed over Evelyn. She scrolled further, a sickening dread building with each new image. There were more photos, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. Charlotte at a lavish spa, a serene expression on her face, as she enjoyed a massage. Charlotte dressed in elegant evening gowns, laughing vivaciously at formal dinners, surrounded by unfamiliar faces, clinking glasses of champagne. Each picture was a testament to carefree indulgence, a world away from the sterile, hushed reality of David's ICU room. It was clear. Charlotte was not in the midst of a family emergency. She was on vacation, a luxurious, romantic getaway. Then, a man appeared in several of the photos. Tall, dark-haired, with a confident, almost possessive arm around Charlotte's waist in one shot, his hand resting on her shoulder in another. His face was unfamiliar, but his constant presence by Charlotte's side, the way they leaned into each other, spoke volumes. "Mark," Evelyn read in a comment thread below one of the photos, an admiring friend's tag. Mark, not a distant relative, not a work colleague, but someone intimately involved in this extravagant charade. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and confusing, were now clicking into place, forming a picture of devastating betrayal. The final photo made Evelyn's blood run absolutely cold, freezing her to the core. It was a close-up, taken on the ship's balcony, the vast expanse of the ocean, a breathtaking backdrop. Charlotte and Mark, their faces glowing in the soft, romantic light, locked in a passionate kiss. Her eyes were closed, her body pressed against his. The accompanying caption, written by Charlotte herself, was a dagger to Evelyn's heart. "Some dreams are worth waiting for." The audacity, the callousness, the sheer cruelty of it all was almost unimaginable. David, fighting for his life, clinging to every breath, while his wife, his supposed partner, was living out her dreams with another man on a luxury cruise. In that moment, Evelyn's accommodating nature, her gentle understanding, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The initial shock gave way to a blazing inferno of fury and a fierce, unwavering determination. This wasn't just abandonment. It was a premeditated act of calculated cruelty, a public declaration of her newfound freedom while David lay unconscious. The anger that surged through Evelyn was unlike anything she had ever felt. It was cold, precise, and absolute. She vowed, then and there, that Charlotte would pay for this. Justice, whatever form it might take, would be exacted. For the next 3 agonizing days, the hospital became Evelyn's world. She was a silent sentinel at David's bedside, a quiet observer in the bustling ICU. While her heart ached with worry for her son, her mind meticulously catalogued every detail, every casual conversation, every stray remark about Charlotte's behavior during her brief presence. She spoke to every nurse and doctor who had interacted with Charlotte, piecing together a mosaic of Charlotte's actions, searching for consistency or further inconsistencies that might explain the unbelievable betrayal she had uncovered on Instagram. The image of Charlotte on that cruise ship, smiling and free, was burned into her memory. Nurse Brenda, a compassionate soul who had become Evelyn's confidant, discreetly shared her observations. When David was first brought in 5 days ago, Charlotte seemed annoyed more than anything. Brenda confided in a low voice during a quiet moment. She was on her phone constantly, scrolling, sighing. I even saw her roll her eyes a couple of times while David was being assessed. The words sent a fresh jolt through Evelyn. Annoyed? Not worried, not frantic, but annoyed. It painted a picture so incongruous with the loving wife Charlotte had always outwardly presented. Brenda continued, her voice barely a whisper. I overheard her on the phone the day before she left. She was talking about cabin upgrades and how she couldn't wait to get out of here. I thought she meant getting out of the hospital, but now, with what you've told me, her voice trailed off, a shared understanding passing between the two women. Evelyn felt a fresh wave of nausea. Cabin upgrades. It confirmed the cruise, solidifying the sickening reality of Charlotte's premeditated departure. Her distress was a facade, a performance. She left without even saying goodbye to the nurses on her last shift, Brenda added, her brow furrowed, and her phone was already showing international roaming when David's condition took a turn for the worse a couple of days into his stay. We tried to call her, but it just went straight to voicemail, saying the number was unreachable. Evelyn closed her eyes, a cold, hard knot forming in her stomach. International roaming. That detail, so mundane, yet so damning, cemented Charlotte's deliberate absence. She had planned this escape, leaving David to face death alone, unreachable, uncaring. By the end of the 3rd day, David's condition had stabilized, though he remained unconscious. The immediate crisis had passed, allowing Evelyn a brief window to leave his side. Her heart still ached, but a new, steely resolve had taken root. She needed to know everything. Armed with her emergency key, Evelyn drove to David's house. The familiar facade seemed to mock her with its pretense of normalcy. This wasn't just about Charlotte anymore. It was about uncovering the full, unvarnished truth of her betrayal. This was about protecting her son. Entering the house, Evelyn made directly for David and Charlotte's bedroom. The atmosphere felt wrong, devoid of their usual shared intimacy. She opened Charlotte's side of the walk-in closet. The sight that greeted her solidified her suspicions. While many clothes remained, all of Charlotte's most expensive, fashionable dresses were gone. Her valuable jewelry box, usually overflowing, was conspicuously empty. The designer luggage set, a gift from David, was also missing. It wasn't a spontaneous departure for a family crisis. It was a carefully orchestrated exit, a deliberate stripping of her belongings. Charlotte hadn't packed in a hurry. She had packed with purpose. On Charlotte's vanity, her sleek silver laptop lay open, logged in. With trembling hands, Evelyn hovered over the touchpad, her mind warring between a sense of invasion and the desperate need for answers. The need won. She clicked on the email icon, the familiar interface appearing on the screen. What she found there would forever shatter any remaining illusion of Charlotte's innocence. Emails. Hundreds of them, dating back 3 months, painting a vivid, sordid picture of a passionate affair. Mark. His name appeared again and again, intertwined with expressions of longing, secret rendezvous, and clandestine plans. There were hotel reservation confirmations, flirtatious messages, and explicit promises. And then, the cruise. The booking confirmation was dated 6 weeks prior to David's collapse. 6 weeks. Charlotte had planned this elaborate escape, this luxurious betrayal, while pretending to be a loving wife. The casual deceit made Evelyn's stomach churn. Further digging unearthed a series of emails between Charlotte and her sister. In these messages, Charlotte painted David in a cruel light. "He's been so boring lately," one email read. "Always focused on work, never any excitement. I need more than this," another confessed. "I think I'm done with this marriage. Mark makes me feel alive again, truly alive." The words were like sharp shards of glass, piercing Evelyn's heart. Her son, who adored Charlotte, had been deemed boring, replaced by the fleeting thrill of an affair. And then, the most damning email of all. Sent by Charlotte to Mark, just 5 days ago, precisely when David first became gravely ill. "David is sick," it read, with a chilling nonchalance. "But it's probably just a cold. Perfect timing for our trip. He'll be fine by the time I get back, and I can deal with the divorce papers then." Evelyn's vision blurred with unshed tears, her hands shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the desk. A cold, cynical calculation. Charlotte had not only planned her escape, but she had also callously dismissed David's severe illness, viewing it as a convenient opportunity to further her own selfish agenda. She was not just abandoning him, she was actively planning her exit, with his illness as a convenient distraction. Evelyn methodically printed every incriminating email, every booking confirmation, every damning message. The stack of papers grew, a tangible monument to Charlotte's deceit. She then accessed Charlotte's online banking and credit card statements. The evidence mounted further. Extravagant purchases, lavish dinners, designer clothes, and then the $8,000 charge for the luxury cruise, paid in full weeks ago. Charlotte had been systematically draining their shared accounts, spending David's money to fund her affair and her escape. It was well past midnight when Evelyn finally finished. The pile of printed evidence, a formidable testament to Charlotte's calculated betrayal. The initial shock and hot surge of rage had been replaced by a cold, unwavering calm. Her hands no longer trembled. Her mind, sharp and focused, now worked with a clear, singular purpose. This wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about meticulous, undeniable proof. Charlotte would not get away with this. Not with David's money, not with David's life, and certainly not with her callous indifference. Evelyn would ensure that justice, in its most comprehensive form, would be served. The first rays of dawn brought not just a new day, but a sharpened resolve for Evelyn. The previous night's discovery had transformed her grief and rage into a cold, calculated determination. The very next morning, she made a pivotal call to Robert Hayes, her longtime family lawyer. Robert was a formidable figure, known for his incisive intellect, unwavering discretion, and a reputation for dismantling even the most complex legal challenges with surgical precision. He had handled Evelyn's own late husband's estate, and she trusted his judgment implicitly. He listened patiently as Evelyn recounted the bare bones of the situation, immediately sensing the gravity in her voice. An hour later, Evelyn sat across from Robert, in his impeccably organized office. The pile of printed emails, credit card statements, and cruise confirmations spread out before them like a meticulously arranged crime scene. Robert, his expression unreadable behind his glasses, slowly sifted through each piece of evidence. He paused at Charlotte's cynical email, the one about David's illness being perfect timing. A low whistle escaped his lips. "Evelyn," he said, pushing the stack back towards her, his voice devoid of emotion. "This is not just compelling. This is damning evidence of adultery and abandonment, especially considering David's critical condition. It's as strong as it gets." His words, while confirming her worst fears, also brought a strange sense of validation. Robert leaned forward, his gaze steady. Here's our strategy. We continue to document everything. Every text, every email, every interaction. But for now, we wait. Charlotte will return, expecting to find a grieving, grateful husband, perhaps even one too weak to challenge her narrative. She'll have a story ready. I'm sure. We let her tell it. We let her dig her own hole. He emphasized the importance of maintaining a calm exterior to avoid any emotional confrontations that could jeopardize their legal position. Evelyn listened intently, a plan taking shape in her mind. As a mother, Evelyn's deepest concern, beyond David's recovery, was the welfare of her grandson, Leo. She voiced this to Robert, her voice tinged with anguish. What about Leo? Charlotte abandoned him too, didn't she? Just left him somewhere, without a thought. Robert nodded. With this evidence, David will have an excellent case for primary custody, Evelyn. Especially with your support, given Charlotte's demonstrable abandonment of her responsibilities. A judge will look very unfavorably on a mother who abandons her sick husband and, by extension, her child, to embark on a romantic cruise with another man. His words were a lifeline, a glimmer of hope that Leo would be safe, shielded from Charlotte's toxic influence. Leaving Robert's office, Evelyn felt a profound shift within her. The suffocating helplessness that had plagued her since discovering David's illness had lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of control. She wasn't just David's worried mother anymore. She was a protector, a strategist. Her mission was clear: protect her son, safeguard her grandson, and ensure that Charlotte faced the full consequences of her reprehensible actions. The quiet determination that had begun to simmer now solidified into an unshakable resolve. That evening, back by David's bedside, a miracle unfolded. His eyelids, heavy for days, fluttered open. His eyes, hazy with medication and weakness, slowly focused on Evelyn's face. A weak, almost inaudible whisper escaped his lips. "Mom?" he rasped, his voice raw. Evelyn squeezed his hand, a rush of relief washing over her. "Yes, my love. I'm right here." After a long pause, his voice barely audible, David asked the question Evelyn had been dreading. "Charlotte? Leo?" Evelyn gently stroked his hair, choosing her words carefully. "Leo is safe, darling." She had arranged for her sister, Susan, to care for Leo, ensuring he was oblivious to the unfolding drama. As for Charlotte, Evelyn swallowed hard, maintaining a calm facade. Charlotte. She had to travel unexpectedly for a family matter. She'll be in touch. The lie felt bitter on her tongue, but it was necessary for now. David was too weak, too fragile for the truth. David nodded weakly, his eyes closing for a moment before fluttering open again. He drifted back to sleep, the medication pulling him back into unconsciousness. But not before Evelyn noticed something in his eyes. A flicker of confusion, a subtle tightening around his mouth, an underlying hurt that even his weakened state couldn't completely mask. He hadn't questioned her words, but he hadn't fully accepted them either. A seed of doubt, she realized, had been planted. And that, she knew, would be crucial. The cruise, Evelyn calculated, was scheduled to conclude in approximately 3 days. Charlotte would be returning soon, likely armed with a meticulously crafted story, expecting to weave a tale of woe and self-sacrifice, anticipating a grateful, pliable David. She would expect to manipulate the situation, to smoothly transition into her desired future, perhaps even using David's illness as leverage for a quick divorce settlement. Evelyn could almost see Charlotte's calculating smile, but Evelyn was ready. She decided, with an almost chilling composure, that there would be no emotional outbursts, no fiery confrontations on her part. She would not provide Charlotte with the drama she likely craved, or the opportunity to play the victim. Instead, Evelyn would allow Charlotte to speak, to present her carefully constructed narrative. She would let Charlotte expose her own lies, her own choices, laying bare the full extent of her deception for David to witness himself when he was strong enough. The truth, Evelyn knew, would be Charlotte's undoing, and she would let Charlotte unknowingly deliver it. If you're captivated by this unfolding drama, don't miss a single moment of Evelyn's pursuit of justice. Keep watching, hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to make sure you catch the next part of this incredible journey. You won't believe what happens next. Thursday morning arrived, crisp and deceptively ordinary. Evelyn, having returned from her daily visit to David, was in the kitchen, pretending to brew a fresh pot of coffee. The front door clicked open, followed by the familiar sound of a designer suitcase being wheeled across the hardwood floor. A bright, cheerful voice, dripping with theatrical concern, called out, "Hello? David? Leo? I'm home. Oh, my poor family. I've missed you so much." It was Charlotte. Her voice, so utterly devoid of genuine worry, grated on Evelyn's nerves. Evelyn emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression calm, almost serene. Charlotte, already halfway into the living room, stopped dead, her perfectly tanned face momentarily contorted in surprise. Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock giving way almost instantly to a practiced smile, a forced sigh of relief. "Evelyn, oh, thank goodness you're here. I was so worried, darling. I rushed home as soon as I could." Her act was flawless, almost convincing, if Evelyn hadn't already known the truth. Charlotte, radiating a deep tan that spoke of endless sunshine, launched into her carefully rehearsed narrative. "It was absolutely dreadful, Evelyn. My Aunt Mildred in Florida had a sudden stroke. Just awful. I had to fly down immediately to help with funeral arrangements and everything. The international phone connections were just horrendous, darling. Completely impossible to get through to anyone here. I tried. Truly, I did. But everything was just so chaotic." She gestured dramatically with her manicured hands, the picture of a woman utterly exhausted by an unforeseen tragedy. Evelyn's gaze remained steady, unflinching. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken tension. When Charlotte finally paused, Evelyn's voice cut through the silence, clear and precise. "He's alive," she stated simply, each word a cold, hard stone. Her eyes, however, burned with an intensity Charlotte clearly wasn't expecting. "No thanks to you." The carefully constructed facade Charlotte had built began to crack. Her confident smile wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then a defensive pout. "What are you talking about, Evelyn?" "I told you, I was with Aunt Mildred." Evelyn didn't let her finish. She slowly raised her phone, her thumb gliding across the screen until Charlotte's Instagram feed was visible. She turned the screen towards Charlotte, revealing the incriminating photos of the past week. Charlotte in her bright bikini, lounging on the deck of the luxury cruise ship, the sparkling Caribbean Sea behind her. The image of "it's so good to be free" seemed to mock Charlotte's fabricated grief. The color drained from Charlotte's face, leaving her deeply tanned skin looking sickly. Her eyes darted from the phone to Evelyn's unyielding gaze, then back to the photos. For a terrifying second, Evelyn thought Charlotte might faint, but Charlotte, resourceful even in her panic, quickly regrouped, her mind scrambling for another lie. "Oh, that's Mark, my aunt's neighbor. He was such a dear, Evelyn, helping me through such a terrible time, offering comfort. He insisted I take a day to myself, just to recover from the tragedy. It was a short cruise, a quick escape to clear my head. Nothing more." Her voice was high-pitched, desperate, utterly unconvincing. "Stop!" Evelyn's voice was a low, dangerous rumble, cutting through Charlotte's increasingly frantic explanation. "Just stop lying, Charlotte. There's no Aunt Mildred, no stroke, no funeral, and Mark is not a dear neighbor. I've seen the emails, Charlotte. All of them." The finality in Evelyn's tone was absolute, leaving no room for further pretense. Charlotte recoiled as if struck. The last shred of her composure crumbled. Her face contorted with a mixture of shock and indignation. You invaded my privacy! You went through my personal emails? How dare you?" Her voice rose, a desperate attempt to deflect, to turn the tables. Evelyn merely raised an eyebrow, her gaze unwavering. "Privacy? she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You forfeited all rights to privacy, Charlotte, the moment you abandoned your dying husband. You left him to fight for his life alone, while you were off sailing the Caribbean, living out your dreams with another man. You showed David no privacy, no respect, no loyalty. The words were like sharp-edged daggers, each one hitting its mark. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper, but filled with an undeniable power. Let's be precise, shall we? For the past 3 months, you've been planning this affair with Mark, booking hotels, arranging secret rendezvous. 6 weeks ago, you booked an $8,000 luxury cruise, paid for with David's money, all while you complained to your sister that David was too boring and that you were done with this marriage. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. And then, when David became gravely ill, you saw it not as a tragedy, but as perfect timing for your little romantic escape, believing he'd be fine by the time you got back, and you could then deal with the divorce papers. Evelyn recited Charlotte's own words, with a devastating accuracy. Charlotte's face was now streaked with genuine tears, her carefully applied makeup running. We had problems, Evelyn. You don't understand. I needed space. I needed to think, she pleaded, desperately trying to salvage some shred of justification. Space to think? Evelyn scoffed, her voice incredulous. While David lay unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting for every breath, you were sipping champagne, dancing, and kissing another man. You didn't need space to think, Charlotte. You needed an excuse to abandon your responsibilities and indulge your selfish desires. Evelyn took a breath, the fury simmering beneath her calm exterior threatening to erupt. I have all the evidence, Charlotte. Every email, every bank statement, every photo. My lawyer, Robert Hayes, has it all. And we're going to ensure you lose everything. Every penny of David's money, every claim to this house, and most importantly, you will lose custody of Leo. You will never be alone with my grandson again. The carefully constructed world Charlotte had built around her lies imploded. Panic seized her, manifesting in full-blown, desperate sobs. She sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face, her perfect tan momentarily forgotten. What do you want? She whimpered, her voice raw with a sudden, overwhelming fear. Evelyn watched Charlotte crumble on the couch, her once pristine composure dissolving into panicked tears. The sight brought her no joy, only a grim satisfaction that the truth was finally exposed. Evelyn's voice, though calm, was imbued with an authority Charlotte had never heard before. What do I want? She repeated, a rhetorical question. I want David to be safe. I want Leo to be safe. And I want you to face the consequences of your choices. She then began to systematically dismantle Charlotte's carefully constructed world, piece by agonizing piece. For years, Charlotte, you've treated David like a personal ATM, Evelyn stated, her voice devoid of emotion. You spent his money on your luxuries, your spa days, your designer clothes, contributing nothing of your own. Every time David tried to rein in your spending, every time he tried to set a boundary, you'd manipulate him with tears, with tantrums, with promises you never intended to keep. Evelyn had witnessed these scenes firsthand, the subtle erosion of David's financial autonomy, always masked by Charlotte's charm. Then, Evelyn moved to the most unforgivable offense in her eyes: Charlotte's neglect of Leo. And Leo, Evelyn continued, her voice hardening with righteous indignation. You treated my grandson like an inconvenience. You left him with neighbors, with friends, whenever your social life called. And this time, you abandoned him for an entire week, without a single call, without a single thought for his well-being, while you were off chasing your dreams on a cruise. The words were a direct hit, striking at the very core of Charlotte's maternal neglect. Charlotte, still sobbing, looked up, her face a tear-streaked mask of desperation. I know, Evelyn. I know I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Please don't let me lose everything. I can change, I promise. I'll do anything. Her pleas were frantic, her usual poise completely shattered. Evelyn shook her head, a cold glint in her eyes. This was not a mistake, Charlotte. she corrected, her voice sharp. A mistake is an error in judgment. This was a calculated, selfish choice. A choice that could have cost David his life. You knew he was gravely ill, and you deliberately chose to abandon him. You chose to spend his money on a sordid affair. That is not a mistake. It is a profound betrayal. There was no room for negotiation in Evelyn's voice, no crack in her resolve. Evelyn delivered the next blow with chilling precision. "David is coming home tomorrow," Charlotte gasped, her tears momentarily forgotten, replaced by a flicker of hope. She clearly envisioned David, weak and vulnerable, ready to be manipulated once more, but Evelyn quickly extinguished that hope. "And you will have to decide your future, Charlotte. Your choices, your consequences." Evelyn leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Let me be absolutely clear. Any attempt to lie to David, any gaslighting, any manipulation, any false tears, and I will present him with every single piece of evidence I have gathered, every email, every bank statement, every photo, every detail of your affair and your abandonment. He will see it all, Charlotte. He will see you for exactly who you are." Her words were a solemn promise, a line in the sand that Charlotte dared not cross. Charlotte stared at Evelyn, her eyes wide with a newfound terror. The meek, accommodating mother-in-law she had so easily dismissed and manipulated for years was gone. In her place stood an unyielding force. A woman whose resolve was absolute, whose fury was cold and calculating. Evelyn's composure, her unwavering gaze, left no doubt that she would follow through on every threat. The comfortable life Charlotte had built on lies, and David's generosity was rapidly unraveling before her very eyes. Still, a faint glimmer of her old defiance surfaced. "You can't turn David against me," Charlotte tried, her voice lacking its former conviction, a tremor running through it. "He loves me. He'll never believe you." It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to assert some control, to cling to the illusion that David was still hers to command. Evelyn almost smiled, but the gravity of the situation prevented it. "I don't need to turn David against you, Charlotte," she responded, her voice calm and steady. "I only need to ensure he sees you clearly. He will make his own choice about his marriage, about his future, and about what kind of mother he wants for Leo." Evelyn knew David's character. Once he saw the truth, truly saw the depth of Charlotte's betrayal, his integrity would not allow him to remain. As Charlotte continued to weep, her dreams of a life of ease and luxury crumbling around her, Evelyn felt a profound exhaustion settle deep in her bones. There was no surge of triumphant satisfaction, no triumphant glee, only a deep, aching weariness. She knew that the coming days would be agonizing for David, that the truth, while necessary, would wound him deeply. Evelyn had protected him, exposed the deception, but she couldn't shield him from the pain of heartbreak. That, unfortunately, was a consequence David would have to face alone, albeit with his mother by his side. Evelyn arrived at David's house early the next morning, well before David was discharged from the hospital. The scent of cleaning products hung heavy in the air, masking the stale emptiness that had permeated the house days ago. Charlotte was in a frantic flurry, dusting surfaces with aggressive vigor, plumping cushions, and arranging flowers. Her eyes were red and puffy, clearly from a night of crying, but she wore a strained smile, attempting to project the image of a devoted, worried wife, eager for her husband's return. The charade was almost pitiful. As Evelyn watched, Charlotte paused her frantic activities and turned, her voice softer, almost pleading. "Evelyn, please. We can fix this. I'll end things with Mark. I'll delete all my social media. We can go to marriage counseling. Anything. We just have to keep David from finding out about all of it. Please. For David's sake." She was trying to negotiate, to bargain for her comfortable life, still believing she could control the narrative. Evelyn's response was swift and uncompromising. "No, Charlotte," she stated calmly, her voice firm. "David deserves to know the truth about his wife. He almost died believing you were by his side, when you were living a fantasy with another man. He deserves to know exactly what kind of person you truly are." There was no softening in Evelyn's gaze, no hint of a concession. Charlotte's face hardened. Her tears momentarily dried, replaced by a flicker of anger. The mask of contrition slipped further. "If you tell him," she hissed, her voice low and venomous, "I'll tell David that you've been harassing me, that you've always hated me, and have been trying to break up our marriage for years. I'll make sure he believes you're the villain here." Evelyn merely scoffed. "My harassment, Charlotte, consists only of printing your own emails and your own social media posts. Hard facts. Recorded in your own words. Good luck convincing David that your affair, your cruise, and your callous dismissal of his life-threatening illness are somehow my doing." The threat was hollow, and both women knew it. "He'll forgive me," Charlotte insisted, her voice now edged with desperation, clinging to the only hope she had left. "He always does. That's who he is." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes, David is a generous and forgiving man. That much is true. But there's a difference between forgiveness and trust, Charlotte. And once trust is shattered so completely, once someone has shown you their true colors, it's almost impossible to rebuild." She let the words hang in the air, a chilling prophecy. A short while later, Evelyn drove David home from the hospital. He looked better than he had in the ICU, the gauntness in his face slightly less pronounced, a faint color returning to his cheeks. But he was still weak, fragile, moving with a slowness that pained Evelyn to witness. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine. Evelyn kept glancing at David, her heart aching for the pain she knew he was about to endure. Suddenly, David spoke, his voice hoarse but clear enough to convey a nascent suspicion. "Mom," he began, "about Charlotte's aunt." "Aunt Linda?" Evelyn braced herself, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Yes, darling? My Aunt Eleanor called me today. Just briefly. She was asking about Charlotte's family, saying she remembered Charlotte mentioning her Aunt Linda, who lived in Florida." David paused, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Aunt Eleanor said she thought Linda had passed away 3 years ago. Is that right?" Evelyn's heart ached. Even in his weakened state, David's sharp mind was working, connecting the dots, picking apart Charlotte's flimsy lies. He wasn't just accepting what he was told. He was actively seeking the truth. The pain in his voice, the dawning realization, was unbearable to witness. "Yes, David," Evelyn confirmed gently, her voice barely a whisper. "Your Aunt Eleanor is correct. Charlotte's Aunt Linda passed away 3 years ago." The confirmation hung in the air. A heavy, undeniable truth that began the final unraveling of Charlotte's deceit. They pulled into the driveway. As David slowly walked towards the front door, leaning heavily on Evelyn's arm, Charlotte burst out, a whirlwind of manufactured concern. "David! Oh, my darling! You're home! I was so worried!" She rushed forward, attempting to embrace him, to resume her performance as the grieving, relieved wife. But David's eyes, though still tired, were watchful. No longer clouded by illness, he gently, almost imperceptibly, stiffened at her touch. "Charlotte?" David's voice was dangerously quiet, cutting through her effusive welcome. "Mom just told me Aunt Linda passed away 3 years ago." Charlotte froze, her smile dissolving. Her mind, quick to spin a new web of lies, stammered, "Oh, not that Aunt Linda, darling. I meant Aunt Laura. Aunt Laura Wilson. On my father's side. She lives in Miami. It was her. She had the stroke. I must have misspoken." She rattled off the new name with practiced ease, trying to sound convincing. David, still supported by Evelyn, reached for his phone with shaking hands. He sat heavily on the couch, ignoring Charlotte's frantic attempts to fuss over him. His fingers moved slowly but deliberately across the screen, typing, searching. The silence in the living room was thick with tension, punctuated only by Charlotte's nervous fidgeting and the soft tap of David's fingers. After a long, agonizing moment, David looked up from his phone. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a profound sadness and disbelief. He looked directly at Charlotte, his voice a barely audible whisper, yet carrying the weight of absolute truth. "There's no death certificate, Charlotte. Not for any Laura Wilson in Florida. Not in the last 3 months. Not in the last year. The final lie had been exposed, leaving nothing but bare, ugly truth. With David's quiet, damning revelation about the non-existent Aunt Laura Wilson, Charlotte's composure shattered completely. The last vestiges of her carefully constructed facade crumbled into dust. She burst into ugly, gasping sobs, throwing her hands up in a desperate, frantic display. There were complications. David, so many complications. I was just trying to protect you, darling, from all the stress. Her words were choked with tears. A final, desperate attempt to spin the narrative, to play the victim, to cling to her rapidly diminishing credibility. But David's anger, though still tempered by his physical weakness, was building. His voice, though hoarse, grew stronger with each word, tinged with disbelief and profound betrayal. "Protect me from stress? Charlotte?" he retorted, pushing himself slightly upright on the couch. "You disappeared for a week while I was in the ICU, fighting for my life. The nurses told me you were hardly here. They said you seemed more annoyed than worried. They told me your phone was on international roaming days ago." The truth, no longer abstract, began to hit him with full force. Evelyn, sensing the critical moment, quietly reached for the folder she had prepared. She placed it gently on David's lap, a silent offering of undeniable proof. He looked at her, his eyes asking a question she couldn't voice, then back at Charlotte's frantic, tear-streaked face. With trembling hands, David opened the folder. He began to read. His face, already pale from his illness, became a canvas of rapidly shifting emotions. Hurt, disbelief, and then a slow, simmering fury. His eyes scanned the printed emails, the cold, calculated words of his wife. Each sentence was a fresh stab, painting a picture of deliberate deception, of a love he thought was real, revealed to be a cruel illusion. His gaze fixed on the printed Instagram photos. He went completely still, his breath catching in his throat. He saw Charlotte on the cruise ship, radiant and carefree, then the pictures with Mark. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, thick with an anguish that tore at Evelyn's heart. "Charlotte, were you on a romantic cruise? With another man? While I was fighting for my life?" Charlotte buried her face in her hands, her sobs escalating. "I can explain, David. I swear I can. I love you, darling, I do. It was just a moment of weakness, a terrible mistake," she choked out. Her words desperate and unconvincing. David's hand, still unsteady, found one of the photos within the folder. The one of Charlotte kissing Mark on the ship's balcony. He held it up, his voice now dangerously quiet, a cold rage creeping in. "Explain this, Charlotte. Explain how you posted. It's so good to be free. While I was lying in a hospital bed, clinging to every breath. Explain how you thought that was acceptable." He continued to read, his eyes blazing with a newfound clarity as he devoured the damning emails between Charlotte and her sister and the cynical message to Mark. He saw the timeline, the months of planning, the cold calculation. He saw the explicit details of his money being spent to fund her affair, her luxurious escape. His face hardened, the last vestiges of his gentle nature replaced by a chilling resolve. Then, with a strength that surprised even himself, David pushed himself up from the couch. He wavered for a moment, still physically fragile, but his eyes were fixed on Charlotte, burning with a fury that transformed him. "Get out!" he roared, the word echoing in the stunned silence of the living room, a raw, visceral cry of betrayal. "Get out of my house!" Charlotte looked up, her tear-filled eyes darting desperately to Evelyn, pleading for intervention, for a softening, for any sign of her usual accommodating nature. But Evelyn remained impassive, her face a mask of stone, watching Charlotte's carefully constructed world finally collapse. She had promised to stay out of it, to let Charlotte expose herself, and she would honor that. But I'm your wife," Charlotte protested, her voice cracking. "This is my home, too." David's laugh was harsh, devoid of humor. "You ceased being my wife, Charlotte. The moment you abandoned me to die, you gave up any claim to this home. And to me, When you chose a luxury cruise and another man over your dying husband. His words cut through her, sharp and final. Charlotte let out a wail, scrambling to her feet. She stumbled up the stairs, her sobs echoing through the house as she gathered her remaining belongings. David watched her go, then slowly, heavily, sank back into the armchair, his face etched with exhaustion, both physical and emotional. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. When he opened them again, he looked at Evelyn, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "I'm not sorry, Mom. Not sorry I finally saw the truth." The pain was immense, but so was the clarity. Minutes later, Charlotte reappeared, dragging her now 2 large designer suitcases down the stairs, her face blotchy and swollen. She paused at the front door, turning to face David one last time. "You'll regret this, David," she spat, her voice laced with bitterness. "You'll regret throwing away everything we had." David met her gaze, his expression cold and unwavering. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, devoid of warmth. "My only regret, Charlotte," he said, his voice flat, "is not seeing you clearly sooner." With that, Charlotte flung open the door and stormed out, slamming it shut behind her, leaving behind a silence that was finally, truly, free. The 3 weeks following Charlotte's dramatic departure brought a gradual, tender healing to the house. David, though still recovering physically, grew stronger with each passing day. The profound betrayal had left deep wounds, but the clarity of the truth, hard-won as it was, also brought a strange, quiet peace. Leo, blissfully unaware of the turmoil, returned from Aunt Susan's, filling the house with his innocent laughter once more. The heavy silence that had settled upon the home was finally replaced by the gentle hum of normalcy, a sense of quiet resilience slowly taking root. Charlotte, however, was not one to fade quietly. The harassment began subtly, then escalated. First, a call from Leo's school. Charlotte had demanded to take Leo for lunch, claiming a marital disagreement and insisting on her rights as his mother. David, his voice firm, immediately called the school back. He instructed them, clearly and unequivocally, that Charlotte was not to pick up Leo, nor was she to be given access to him without David's express permission. "If she attempts to contact the school or Leo again without my direct approval," David warned, "please call the police." Then came the phone calls to David himself. Charlotte's voice, initially laced with feigned remorse, quickly turned manipulative. "David, please, we can fight for this marriage. Think of Leo, he needs his mother and father together." She tried to leverage her son, using his innocence as a tool. David, however, remained calm. "Leo is precisely why I cannot accept your abandonment, Charlotte," he responded, his voice steady. "His well-being is my priority, and a mother who abandons him and his dying father is not the role model he deserves." He calmly ended the call, cutting off her desperate pleas. As David's resolve became apparent, Charlotte's tone hardened. "Fine, then," she shrieked in a subsequent call. "We'll go to court. I'll demand half of everything and joint custody. You won't get away with this, David." It was a desperate threat, and David, still with Evelyn by his side, relayed her intentions to his lawyer, Robert Hayes. Robert simply nodded, unfazed. "Let her try. We are ready." The divorce papers arrived, predictably, portraying David as a workaholic, emotionally distant husband, and Charlotte as a devoted mother, utterly distraught by marital problems, forced to take a therapeutic retreat to clear her head. Robert explained it was a common, cynical strategy, designed to evoke sympathy and shift blame. Evelyn felt a familiar surge of anger at Charlotte's audacious lies, but she also knew they had the truth on their side. During Charlotte's deposition, the true power of Evelyn's meticulous documentation became evident. Robert presented Charlotte's lawyer with 3 thick binders, each page a testament to Charlotte's deceit. Printed emails, detailed financial records, cruise bookings, and sworn affidavits from hospital staff confirming her disinterest and abandonment. Charlotte, sitting across the table, visibly shook as she watched her lawyer's face fall, realizing the extent of the evidence against her. The carefully constructed facade of her defense crumbled under the weight of undeniable facts. Just before the custody hearing, Charlotte made a critical, desperate error. Leo was performing in his first-grade class play. Charlotte, unannounced and without permission, showed up, making a dramatic entrance. Leo, spotting his mother in the audience, froze midline. His little face crumpled, tears welling in his eyes. He broke down on stage, convinced he was the reason his mother had left. It was a heart-wrenching scene that shocked the entire school. That evening, Leo, still upset, asked Evelyn, "Why did Mom leave, Grandma? Did I do something wrong?" Evelyn, holding him close, gently stroked his hair. "No, my sweet boy," she explained, her voice soft but firm. "You did nothing wrong. Sometimes adults make choices that are very difficult to understand, choices that are not about you. Your mom made some choices. But I promise you, Leo, I will never leave you." Her words were a solemn vow, a promise to protect this innocent child from the fallout of his mother's selfishness. It was then that Evelyn knew she had to testify at the custody hearing. It wasn't enough for the judge to see the documents. They needed to hear the human cost, the true character of the woman who would abandon her family. Evelyn was determined to ensure that the judge fully understood the depth of Charlotte's deceit and neglect. At the hearing, Charlotte's lawyer painted her as a heartbroken victim, a loving mother, pushed to her limits by David's neglect. Then, Evelyn took the stand. Her voice, clear and unwavering, filled the courtroom. She spoke not with anger, but with a quiet, devastating honesty. She detailed Charlotte's years of treating David as a resource, her cold calculation regarding his illness, her abandonment of both husband and son for a romantic tryst, and her deliberate, manipulative attempts to use Leo. "Charlotte," Evelyn testified, her gaze steady, "loves the idea of being a mother, but not the sacrifice, the responsibility, or the unwavering presence that true motherhood demands." The judge's ruling was decisive, leaving no room for doubt. David was granted primary custody of Leo. Charlotte was awarded only supervised visitation, limited to brief, structured encounters. A stark condemnation of her maternal fitness. There would be no spousal support, and David retained all marital assets. In delivering his judgment, the judge condemned Charlotte's fundamental lack of character and her egregious abandonment of both her husband and her child. Justice, in its fullest form, had been served. 6 months later, Evelyn made David's house her permanent home. David had fully healed, both physically and emotionally, his resilience shining through the pain. Leo thrived under their combined love and stability, his infectious laughter once again a constant soundtrack to their lives. Charlotte sporadically exercised her supervised visitation rights, a shadow of her former self. Her relationship with Mark long over, struggling financially, a stark contrast to the luxurious life she had once so brazenly pursued. A year after the ordeal, Evelyn sat on the porch, watching David and Leo play in the yard, a scene of pure, unadulterated joy. David was genuinely happy, truly free. Leo was secure, loved, and blossoming. Evelyn reflected on their strength, the profound peace that came from courageously cutting toxic people out of one's life. She thought of herself, the once accommodating mother-in-law, now transformed into a warrior who had saved her son and grandson. And in that quiet moment, Evelyn knew that every painful step, every tear, every battle, had been worth it.